So in these talks, the Dharma talks, I'll be talking about the practice of jhana. So some of the understanding, the concepts, the relationships to the various aspects of practice. And just to say that this is a practice I've done now for over 20 years, and I still find it very rewarding to do. Being able to have the skill set to draw upon meditative concentration is incredibly helpful with other meditations. You know how to stay focused, you don't get distracted as easily, and you can do deep dives into other practices. So it really is a good skill set to develop. There's discussion in the primarily in the West about is jhana needed in the Theravadan model of awakening? And the consensus among most of the teachers, there's not full agreement, is that first jhana is necessary to progress along the four stages of awakening in Theravada Buddhism. So it is something that's encouraged to be practiced. The Buddha practiced this throughout his life. The first recorded story that I've seen of him doing jhana practice or hearing about it was when he was a child, and he was taken to some type of a agricultural festival by his nanny, and it must have been so riveting that she wanted to go closer and see it. So she parked him under some type of a tree, under the shade, in the shade, and went off to go get closer to all the activities. And sitting there, the Buddha just settled on his breath and ended up having first jhana arise at this young age. And later, after leaving palace life and becoming a wandering sadhu, a practitioner, after going through a lot of ascetic hardships, he remembered that practice, that experience as a child. And so he began practicing it again, found teachers who taught it, which was a fairly premier practice in those days. There weren't many other practices that went as far as the jhanas did. And in some of the yogic and Hindu teachings, it was that the eighth jhana was the pinnacle that was viewed as akin to enlightenment, if one could experience that. And the Buddha continued to practice this. He practiced it as an ascetic, and then he folded it into the structure of Buddhism. And I'm told by some Buddhist scholars that he practiced this every wasa, every rains retreat. The monastics, even to this day, for 3 months a year, go find a monastery to go practice in because of the monsoons in Southeast Asia. And this person told me that they had seen through the various literature that he practiced jhana practice a lot of times on these retreats. And it's recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the final sutta of the Buddha, that he practiced this right before his death. He did the first through eighth jhana, then 8 back down to 1, came out of jhana and passed away. So clearly it was an important practice to him, and he could do most any practice he wished, as we can imagine. So the concentration meditation, the jhana practice, is in a category of Theravada Buddhism called samatha. And Theravada Buddhism really has 3 main practice areas. Sila, which has to do with ethics or wholesomeness, the precepts. Then there's the samatha, which is purification of mind practices. So practices that help us to purify our attachment to our thinking, to our identity, to our relationship to concepts. It helps a lot with that. And the other area of practice is vipassana, which is usually translated as purification of view. So the ideal practice path would be to start with sila, really work on behavior, not creating more karma, not creating more remorseful situations, and then moving into the samatha practices, of which the breath awareness, anapanasati, would be the first practice. if you were to show up at Pawak Monastery today, I'm told that you would be given this practice as an initial practice. So it's still considered important in the starting point. And then one would progress through this into the other samatha practices, the 32 body parts, skeleton, kasinas, the heart practices, Brahma Viharas, protective meditations, and some others. And then only one would move over and start doing vipassana. They would do it through practicing the 4 elements. That would conclude the samatha, and then one would move on into the vipassana practices. So the jhana practice, concentration practice, the samatha, some of the English translations for that term are serenity, tranquility, concentration. So it's known that by doing these practices, by selecting and staying with one meditative object, we're in effect giving the rest of our brain a sort of mini vacation. And we really do slow down the thoughts. We do slow down the mental activity when we do this practice. So you'll find a certain peacefulness, a certain ease in your system as you continue in this practice. This practice, as I mentioned, is particularly known for purification of mind, which means it purifies the attachment we have to our thinking, to our concepts, and it begins to slowly, gradually erode our allegiance to our identity as it is. To think that I'm only this individual body self and that's all I am is a very limited view. And in Buddhism, we reveal through different practices that it's actually not the whole story. There's a lot more going on. So working with the jhana practice also lessens our relationship, softens our relationship with the hindrances, the places where we get snagged and it's difficult to go deeper in meditation. So by doing this, by returning to the meditative object, we're softening our attachment to the hindrances. We're softening our attachment to things like doubt. We're landing more in the truth. And as I say, it does help erode our allegiance to the personal identity as the only identity. And that lessens the sense of me. So we get softer, so we're able to open more, make contact with the unconditioned world, the absolute in particular. So the main aspect of concentration meditations is that you have one meditative object that is the sole focus. It's prioritized over everything else. So anytime you find your awareness any place but the breath, you come back. You choose to repeatedly come back each time. Every time that you do come back, it's a little purification of mind because you're choosing not to get caught up in your thoughts, not to get caught up in memories, future planning, remorse, any of that. And you're coming back to be with the breath. So you're really electing to turn away, and that softens the hold that all that has on us. So one of the aspects that's important is that the breath is the object, the breath in the Anapana region only. And we want to rest awareness on the breath. We have to be careful not to engage our mind or our eyes with this practice. In normal life, we use our eyes to look at whatever we're concentrating on or looking at. So if we were to look at my stick, all of our eyes would go over there. And that's a normal way of being. And so in this practice, one of the problems is if we're using our human eyes to watch the breath in the Anapana region, our eyes are then pointed down at this area, and it ultimately doesn't work. Number one, it doesn't help. And it will generally lead to eye strain, which can lead to headaches. And there are folks who unfortunately weren't caught early enough. And so there's some of the old timers have recurrent headaches because of this practice. They weren't instructed not to use the human eye. So really keep the eyes soft, just keep them focused at the horizon as you let awareness rest on the breath in the Anapana region. This is sort of a fine point, but the skin is not the object. Initially, as we're practicing, one of the ways we know the breath is from its movement across the skin in the Anapana region. That's perfectly fine and normal. But once you start getting deeper in your concentration, you want to lift your awareness off the skin and really just hold the breath passing in and out there. It sounds like a fairly minor point, but it really is helpful. The number one question that I've gotten teaching this meditation for 20 years is, I can't feel my breath. I can't feel it on the inhale, the exhale. I can only feel one nostril, or I can't feel it at all. And I'll say that everybody that's practiced over those 20 years, everybody that stayed with the practice was able to make contact with the breath. I even had some people who had medical issues where they couldn't breathe through their nose. And we found a way that they could breathe softly through their mouth and they could feel the breath in the Anapana region. So it's harder. It's a much harder object, but it is possible. So it just means staying with it. As the concentration deepens, you'll get more and more focused contact. It's very important to put down other techniques, other meditations. If you've done other styles of jhana practice, you need to put those down too. For some reason, this is a practice where it doesn't work to mix and match. You have to start organically, just coming to the breath, and then the practice builds in a particular way. And the people that try and short-circuit it or get a head start somehow, it eventually stalls. It'll go a little bit and then it just stays. So it's not a good idea to do. So try and relax whatever you've heard about from other teachers. There are a couple of supports you can use that are traditional supports. One is counting the breath. So if you find you're just getting distracted a lot, you can't stay with the breath long, one of the strategies is to count the breath. And you count it inhale, exhale, and then a very soft 1. Inhale, exhale, soft 2. And the reason I say soft number is because our minds love to grab onto the number and make that our meditative object. And so since we're taught in school to pay attention to these numbers, we will do it in the practice. So we need a really soft number. It's a placeholder. The mind has an amazing capacity to race between the breaths, to race away and be in all sorts of mischief. So if we want to use the counting, it helps keep us focused here. And I was taught to do the counting 1 to 8 and then back down from 8 to 1. If you do it in tens, it's easy to go well beyond. We're taught in school to count in tens, so we get used to that, and we can find we're at 132 and not realize we've shot past 10 long ago. So give that a try if you feel like you want a little extra support, staying with the breath. As soon as you're feeling solid on the breath, you're feeling like you have a clear connection, try relaxing the counting, try putting it down. The other is a traditional support called long and short. And this is one I've only seen used a couple times successfully. And effectively what you do is you take a breath, and then the next breath you take, you instantly know, was it longer or shorter than the prior breath? The problem with this, as you can imagine, is you're doing a comparison. Well, let's see, was it shorter or longer? It was longer than the one that was just before, but shorter than the one before, and we start doing this evaluation is the problem. Like I say, a couple folks I know have used it successfully, but most people, they get really into comparing mind and it gets very complicated. So if you're going to try that, really pay attention to see if it's benefiting you or if it's distracting you. I favor the counting. So if I'm coming to this practice and haven't done it for a while, I generally do the counting when I start. So you'll see in the instructions to this meditation, the word mindfulness is used. That's a commonly used word, obviously, in the West and in the world today, and it doesn't mean the same thing. Mindfulness, the original Pali term is sati, and sati for many generations was translated as mindfulness. But fairly recently, the last 20 years or so, some of the scholars have been putting out the idea that it also can mean awareness. So it's where are we placing awareness? Where are we directing awareness? And so again, we're focusing on the breath in the Anapana region. So we're mindful of the breath. We're inviting awareness to be with the breath and then stay with the breath in the Anapana region. When you're not meditating, I've mentioned several times, you want to stay with the breath. Continuity is terribly important. In this practice, there's no specific form of walking. You don't need to do any kind of mindful walking that they have in the Theravada tradition or the Zen tradition. You just walk. But the key is you don't walk faster than your breath. So if you're walking and you can't stay with your breath, slow down. Connect to the breath and then do your walking. And that way you can stay in contact there. Typically on retreats, most people for the first few days have a lot of sleepiness. Most people in the world are fairly sleep deprived, so it's not uncommon. After 2 or 3 days, if you still find you're really sleepy, then I'd like you to let me know in an interview, because that can often be pointing to a kind of psychological defense or a strategy to avoid going too deep. So if you find you're getting sleepy in the hall, one of the best things to do is stand up. It's fairly hard for us to fall asleep standing up. And one of the ways to tell you're falling asleep is when you get the arm and leg twitches, that involuntary twitches. If you're having that, you're getting very close to sleep. So that's the signal to stand up. You can also rest between sittings. You can take a break and sleep through a sitting if you wish. But how you spend your time is up to you. But you want to be alert for this practice. It's a very important practice to stay focused. All right, I think that's probably enough information for today. Any questions on anything that I've raised today? Yeah, so he's asking for a little clarification. I mentioned about that the skin is not the object. When we first start the practice, most of us effectively rest awareness on the skin. We feel the breath as it moves across the skin. That's how we know it's breath. Once we get more focused, more concentrated, we're with the breath for sustained periods of time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, without serious interruption. Serious interruption means you start on the breath and you find you're thinking about last Thursday's lunch. You're gone. But if you simply step away and step back, that's not a serious interruption. So that's to make that distinction. As you get more concentrated, the strategy is to just lift awareness a little bit off the skin so it's only with the breath. That lets us go a little deeper, because being with the skin, we're diffusing the concentration just a little. The breath has an energetic component. And what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to sit beneath the conceptual level of the breath. The conceptual level is where we're strategizing about the breath, or we're, the breath was better yesterday. I remember when I was 5, I passed out because I lost my breath. We're doing all these associations. That tells us we're still conceptual. When we start dropping beneath the conceptual, we won't have any stories showing up. We won't be wondering about the breath or have these questions. We'll just be with it. And we'll start getting in touch with an energetic impulse that sometimes we can feel even if the breath isn't there. So the breath can get very, very slight in this practice to where we can't actually feel it. What we start practicing with is the energetic impulse. We can feel that. But we need to be off the skin to get into that alley or that lane. So again, it's not something you must do immediately, but when you feel you're getting concentrated, just notice, am I using the skin as part of my awareness? And can I just lift off a little bit? And imagine there's a little piece of plastic outside your nostrils and the air is going through. That's where we want to abide, is where that plastic would be. And all of this will work. It just requires deeper concentration. Like, for example, people might try to go jogging on retreat. Almost no one can stay with the breath and go jogging. Okay. So going too fast for the breath. Yeah. You're not syncing up, you're walking to your breath. That's true in different traditions, the Zen tradition in particular. But here we're not doing that. We're just staying with the breath, letting our feet do their business.
Lose track of the breath and then
If you lose track,
slowing down.
yep,
Basically.
that's the sign to say, slow down, you're going too fast. And you can walk as fast or slow as you want with the breath. So whatever works for you. But it's fine to go walking. It's fine to sit outside, as I mentioned, or sit in your rooms, whatever you want to do. I'm very flexible on that. Yeah, so the question's about counting. Just his brain, when he starts the counting, it likes the counting, doesn't want to stop. Well, usually as we're getting more and more concentrated with the breath, the counting will begin to feel more and more cumbersome. It'll feel awkward, clunky, and it's sort of natural for us to just want to put it down. So you're probably, what's happening is you're shifting a little bit and you're making the counting your object. And this is always the risk of counting, that we do this. So try to come back with some deliberateness to the breath. And remember, the counting is just a small placeholder. It's like a little Post-it after the inhale and exhale. You're just holding your spot until the next breath starts. Then you let go of the number. So try being a little softer with the number, even in counting, if you use that, and see how that goes.